VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. VUX World.
Hello? Ah, wow. Surprised me that. I wasn't expecting this microphone to work. Good morning.
Morning.
Hey, you alright? Here we are then, Project Voice. Wow. I cannot but hello there, Sarah. I didn't notice you sneak in there. How do? Right, I'll move this bag before I start tripping over it. Thank you for coming to the kind of early session, the pre-official conference session, I think. Has everyone just got here today, got here yesterday? Who turned up yesterday? Yesterday, nice. Who's turned up today? Who's the keen early birds and got here on Saturday? Yeah, I knew Tim would be. Nice. Cool, well thank you for turning up. I very nearly didn't make it here. I flew from Heathrow, landed in Philadelphia, got a connecting flight in Philadelphia to Chattanooga, but by the time I got to security, they asked me for my boarding pass, and I realised I didn't actually have a boarding pass. So I had to literally leave security, run down to the next terminal, Terminal B in Philadelphia Airport, which is huge, get a boarding pass, leg it back, go through security again in Terminal A, and then run down to Terminal or Gate F, the other side of the airport with this bag, like full of gear. And I didn't realise, I blame my kid. I want to say that having kids makes you unfit. I was absolutely beside myself. I literally, it was like Home Alone. I got to the end gate, ran through, they got my boarding pass, let me on the plane backed off and took off, and that was it. So I don't know what I'd have done if I missed it. But here we are anyway, nonetheless, and I've had some sleep, so I should be pretty good to go. So this workshop it's not really a workshop as such, because typically a workshop everyone would be kind of doing stuff, but the seating arrangement is organised in such a way that we're probably not going to be doing a whole load. But instead, what I thought I would do is, we've been doing the VUX World podcast for 2 years now, almost 2 years to the date. Come on in, welcome. And this is kind of like a load of the stuff that we've learned from a lot of the people who we've had on the show. So it's called International VUX Best Practice Design, not necessarily because it's all about kind of transcreating from one domain to another or one locale to another, but because it's all practices and principles that should apply and will apply across the board, no matter what language you're designing for, no matter what locale you're designing it in. It's just general international VUX World, VUX. Every time I say VUX World, it's like a twitch. VUX Best Practice. So, who listens to the podcast, by the way? Any listeners of the VUX World podcast? Cool, okay, that's cool. So, has anybody heard of this concept of stage theory before? Anybody been involved? Yeah, you've heard it. Anyone been involved in like service design before? Yeah. So in service design, there's this concept of stage theory, and service design was kind of typically it was almost kind of reserved for like utility companies and governments and stuff like that. But now most things have an element of a service to it. So Netflix, for example, is a service, isn't it? Spotify is a service. There are many digital services, and design and voice user experiences and voice experiences is very similar to designing a service, and the stage theory concept kind of applies to it. So in this stage theory is the concept of the front stage, the backstage, and behind the scenes. So the front stage is everything that you interact with. It's the thing that you will think of as, you would probably think of that as the VUX. It's the experience and the interaction that the user has with the thing. So whether that's an Alexa skill or a Google action or whatever it might be. The backstage is the stuff that sits behind it all. So the backstage is like the code, for example, that you create. It's the audio files that you might generate. It's working with the voice actors and doing all of that kind of stuff. It's all the stuff that is the building blocks that create the experience, but it's the stuff that's kind of invisible to the user. And then behind the scenes is kind of like the kind of admin, the budgets and the project management and the kind of user research and proof of concepts and all that stuff that goes into a service before it starts getting actually built. And this kind of concept, I think Nelson Norman had published something on this. There's a group in England called Methods Digital. They do a lot of stuff with government organisations, and they kind of come up with this, use this theory as well. And it applies to voice design just as much as it does service design. So what we'll do is we'll kind of walk through some of these areas, more so focusing on the front stage more than anything else. But we'll kind of walk through this kind of concept. So, and everything in here adds to or contributes to the end user experience. So for example, in the backstage element where your code is, if the code's a little bit buggy and it's causing some issues, then that affects the user experience. If the behind the scenes, if the project budget is not so much, then that's going to contribute and affect the end user experience as well. So all of this stuff all affects the end user experience, which is why VUX design isn't the job of one person, and producing or creating a voice user experience isn't the job of one person, because everything from front to back contributes to it. So the front stage stuff, some of the stuff that we can learn from. So some of the stuff that we've learned over the last 2 years. Does anyone recognise this fella? Oren Jacob. Used to be at Pixar, and then created a company called, was it Toy Talk? I think it was Toy Talk, wasn't it? And created a load of kind of toys that talked, funnily enough. And then went on to create Pullstring. Pullstring was acquired by Apple around about this time last year. The year before that, we had him on the podcast. And when he was at Pixar, he used to create the software and manage the team that created the animations. So Finding Nemo, Toy Story, Ants, I think was another one. So his team essentially built all of the technology that creates these animations and did the animation themselves. And he told us a story. And I was listening back to the podcast last week or the week before, and he told us a story on there that said that he took a clip from National Geographic of a flowing river, and then his team recreated that flowing river in an animated kind of way, and then went to his boss and put these two clips next to one another and said, can you pick the real river? Which is the real actual National Geographic footage and which is the one that we've recreated? And his boss for a little while was kind of like mulling over it, and he was kind of like, trying to overanalyze it and stuff like that. And in the end, he ended up picking the animated one. He got it right. He was able to just about discern the animated flowing river from the actual National Geographic footage. But the reason why I told us that story is because he said that when you recreate something at human fidelity, it's an interesting exercise, but it's not actually what you need to do to build a new thing yourself. So when you watch Finding Nemo, you're not trying to study whether or not every single element of the water is as realistic as possible. And in some cases, it's designed so that it's purposefully not realistic. Fish don't talk, do they? And so you can apply that exact same logic to conversation design. And conversation design is kind of one of the main strands of voice user experience, which we're all familiar with because it's the thing that we spend most of the time doing when we interact with voice assistants. So what is a conversation? Anyone care to hazard a guess at a definition of a conversation? Don't all shout at once. No? Conversation is a talk, especially an informal one, between two or more people in which news and ideas are exchanged. Okay. Anybody challenge that definition? Everyone agree with that definition? You're a talkative bunch this morning, I'm not going to be able to shut you up. Right. So, with that being the definition of conversation, some conversations have shared goals. Right? The people involved in the conversation all want the same thing out of the conversation. For example, if you work on, let's say you're working on a project with a team, you might have a daily catch-up. And everyone has the same goal out of that conversation. You want to learn what everyone's working on, you want to learn how it's contributing to the whole, you want to figure out whether or not you need any help or any assistance from someone. Everyone's on the same page and everyone's got the same goals. Yeah? Ideally. Well, that's because there's different types of conversations, Bob. Because there's also conversations that have goals but not mutual goals. Yeah? So sometimes, let's say, for example, there's been times when I've had a conversation with somebody in a kind of work environment, and my goal has been to find out what's the matter with this person that has led to a week worth of not as kind of steady progress as I would usually show. My goal of that is to find out what's going on, try and see if I can help fix things, try and see if we can get this person back on track. That person's goal is to get out of the room and not have the conversation with me at all, right? Some goals have some conversations have like unspoken mutual goals, right? So I've had conversations with people in the past where I would love to have them on the podcast, and I know that when I go into the conversation. And they might want to be on the podcast, and they know that going into the conversation, but you go around the houses in order to get to the point where you actually agree what's going to happen. So you'll be making some small talk. How's things going? Oh, yes, it's fantastic. Have you been working on anything interesting lately? Yes, I have. I did this. And I noticed you spoke to X, Y, Z, and the conversation will go around houses, and then you'll start kind of having a chat about what they might have been working on recently, and then it's like, oh, well, actually, why don't you just come on the podcast? That'd be fantastic. I might have had that goal going into the conversation, but I don't start there, you start before it. They might have also had the same goal, but it's not quite direct. It's kind of like subtext. What about to make a conversation? You know the concept to making conversation. What's the definition of making conversation? Look for something to talk about, yeah. It's to talk for the sake of politeness without having anything to say. Now, you might do that. You might have been doing that out there while waiting to come in here. If you're talking for politeness without having anything specific to say. You're talking because it's entertaining. You're talking because it's fun. There's no goals. There's no kind of agenda. It's just talking for the sake of talking. So, and not all conversations have goals, and that's the point. If you're having small talk, if you're making conversation, there's no definitive end point, there's no goal through the conversation, right? What about conversation design? What's the definition of conversation design? I'll spare you shouting it out. So this is from Google. I don't know if you actually wrote this, Wally, or not, but it's probably close to home. Conversation design is a design based on human conversation, similar to how material design is a design language based on pen and paper. The more an interface leverages human conversation, the less users have to be taught how to use it. It's a synthesis of several design disciplines, including voice user interface design, interaction design, visual design, motion design, audio design, and UX writing. There's two words in that series of sentences that are the most important two words that you can take away from this entire talk today. And if you leave now, then I think you will still benefit from knowing what these two words are. What two words are the most important two words in these two sentences?
I think one of them is like the users have to talk less.
The users have to talk less?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Anyone else? Human conversation? Yeah, fair enough. Anyone else? You said human over there somewhere? Yeah, human. The most important two words in that whole thing is based and leverages. Conversation design is based on human conversation and it leverages human conversation. We're not actually designing specific, realistic, real-life conversations. When you interact with a voice assistant, you're doing it for a number of reasons. You want to access content, or navigate through that content, and content could mean information, so it could be the weather, could be the news, or whatever it might be. Navigating through content, like an interactive story or something like that, or you're trying to get something done, you're trying to accomplish a task, right? So, because of that, we've just said that some conversations have goals, some don't have goals, some have shared goals, some have mutual goals, some have subtext. Conversations are a myriad of all kinds of different things in all kinds of different situations. And we're not trying to design a specific conversation. What we're trying to do, and again, going back to Oren Jacob, I've kind of played with this quote a little bit, but this is the essence of it. The goal is not to mimic exactly what humans do, but to find the qualities that are naturally present in our conversations and bring that to Alexa and Google Assistant and our voice interactions. So we're not recreating an actual conversation, we're trying to find the essence of what happens in a conversation and bring that into the experience. And I'll show you a couple of examples of how you can apply that kind of logic. So, the dialogue is one of the most important and fundamental parts of creating a conversation. You start with dialogue, and the dialogue is an exchange between two people. We had Elaine Lee on the podcast probably about, I would say, 3 months ago, something like that. Elaine works at Twilio, and she creates conversations, not only kind of voice-based conversations, but text-based conversations, any kind of dialogue between two people she creates. And we had her on the podcast and we were talking about building trust. And she was talking about the context of building trust, but the things that she mentioned are also some of those fundamental things that happen in conversations. So she spoke about the greeting, listening, echoing back, responding, and fallbacks and kind of like error recovery and stuff like that. Now, sometimes in some conversations there is a greeting, isn't there? Hi, how you doing? Pleasantries at the beginning, you know. But when you think about an Alexa skill, for example, sometimes you might not have a greeting. You might just want to get straight into do something. Sometimes that greeting isn't the kind of greeting that you would typically have with someone if you're having a conversation with them. Sometimes it's a little bit more instructional. Okay. The listening, when we were talking about listening, she was saying that when you have a normal conversation with someone, if you're not listening to someone when they're having a conversation with you, it's one of the most irritating things in the world, isn't it? Having a conversation with someone who's not listening to you. And it's a similar kind of thing that people experience when they say something to, you know, Alexa or what have you, and it doesn't listen to them. It kind of irritates them just as much as it would do if it was a human. So Elaine's concept was that you should try and think of as many different things as possible as a user might say, even if it's not strictly related to the thing that you're doing. So I posted on LinkedIn last week, has anyone got any good examples of some Easter eggs? And someone was referencing the Walmart skill. They found that people were asking the Walmart skill for the weather. And so they created the ability to ask the Walmart skill for the weather. So if you're listening for stuff, even if you're not planning on responding to it, so for example, if you're a bank, for argument's sake, and someone says, I want to transfer money from one account to another, if you're listening for those things, even if you can't deliver on it right now, you can at least have a response for it and show that you're listening. So Elaine's point was to try and do as much work as you possibly can to catch all those other things that people might want to say, might want and expect from your experience. Even if you can't deliver on it, still listen out for it. The echoing back it's essentially an implicit confirmation, as you would say. When someone says something, you would confirm it back to them. So for argument's sake, there's another example of this later on, but if someone wanted to book tickets for Cats and they said, what time is Cats showing? The response might be, Cats is showing at 8:30. Now in a real conversation, you probably wouldn't do that. You probably wouldn't actually respond. You know, sometimes you will repeat what someone said for the sake of trying to clarify whether you've understood them correctly, but you might not do that all the time. We kind of have to, in most cases with conversation assistants, we kind of have to do that because, for example, if you did go to the cinema and you said, what time's James Bond showing, the person on the other end would quite likely just say 8:30, and you trust that they've understood that you were talking about James Bond, and you understand that their response is about James Bond. With these kind of platforms at the moment, the Atom ticket skill, someone, I can't remember who it was and I forget the name, but they wrote a write-up about the Atom ticket skill. And we had Rebecca Evanhoe on the podcast last year, and she'd worked on the Atom ticket skill, and seemingly since she'd left, it's now kind of changed. So typical kind of thing, someone's kind of like undone all of her good work and took out all of these confirmations from it. And so they actually printed in this Medium article a list of all of the lines that were said in this conversation, and not once did it confirm the film that the person was actually talking about. And by the end of it, I'll have to find the link, by the end of it, it was like I wasn't even sure whether we were talking about the same thing by the end of it. Now in a human conversation, you probably wouldn't have that, but in the kind of voice assistant language, I don't think we trust the assistants quite enough right now to just understand that they've understood us. So confirming, implicit confirmations are quite important. The response, again, within the context of building trust, and over time, if you're having lots of conversations with people, you tend to build trust with them, don't you? One of the ways that you'll build trust with your friends is through a series of conversations over time. And if we want to get to a place where people are trusting their voice assistants to transfer money or to shop or to, delegate more tasks to it, then there needs to be a building of trust over time. So in the responses, there is ways that you can show and demonstrate trust. So for example, I'll come on to the fallbacks in a moment. Has anyone used the would you rather skill? Yeah? Yeah, it's pretty good, it's pretty cool, it's quite addictive actually. It's one of those where every interaction's got a really quick turnaround, and it'll just say, would you rather fight a 12 duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck or something like that, I don't know. And then you'd give it a response. And then its response to you is quite interesting. Has anyone heard or read the book Nudge before? Yeah? One person over there. Essentially, it's all around behavioural economics and kind of how people's brain works and how you can design services and products that not necessarily tap into people's psychological frailties. That's probably not the way to phrase it, but it's written in a context of working with like government organisations, and sometimes certain behaviour is preferable. Like you want people to recycle, it's in their interest, it's in your interest, and so in order to try and encourage them to do something like recycle, there are certain ways that you can phrase messages to kind of to increase the chances of them doing it. It's a really good book, I'd recommend it. That led to this concept of mind space, and there was a group that was set up in the UK, like a behavioural economic group of people that kind of come up with this mind space definition. And in there, it's a load of stuff from that book essentially, but there's a load of different examples of the kind of triggers or the kind of levers, psychological levers that people can use to try and nudge the right kind of behaviour. And one of them is the concept of norms and social norms. It's the same reason why every e-commerce website these days has reviews on it, doesn't it? The vast majority of them has reviews on it because they want that social proof to prove to potential customers that everybody else does this kind of behaviour. Yeah. In the UK, there was something done a long time ago on the highways, which was trying to encourage more people to wear seatbelts and trying to reduce accidents on a certain road or whatever it might be. And they trialled all kinds of different messaging, and one of the ones that they ended up settling on was most people wear seatbelts, and then there was something else at the end of it. So it's kind of like trying to, people psychologically want to become part of a group and want to be part of a group. And so what LabWorks do with that skill is whenever you've had this interaction, it will tell you how many other people agreed or had the same answer as you. So if you said, I would rather fight 12 duck-sized horses rather than one horse-sized duck or whatever it is, it'll say 35% of people agree with you, which is quite a nice touch. And we kind of took that. One of the other concepts is the concept of the messenger, in where people are likely to believe something over something else depending on who tells them it, right? So we were involved in the Alexa Cup. That's Sander, Charlie, Joe and me, obviously. And in the Alexa Cup, which we come third in globally, which is quite impressive last year, we created this prototype for a garage booking skill. So if you want to book your tyres to be changed or your MOT or whatever it might be. And within there, we had this line. So we used the social proof concept, and we introduced this line about the messenger, which is that when someone said, I want to book an MOT, we said, according to rated people, the best garage near you is Joe's Garage, and it has an average rating of 5 stars with 500 reviews. Do you want to hear a review or do you want to book an appointment? And so what we did is we showed that it's coming from an authoritative source. Rated people is the place that's given the message. It's not us, this little skill that you've just interacted with for the first time and have no investment in. It's coming from rated people, and it's got over 500 reviews. All right, so we're using the social norms and we're using the messenger. It's the same kind of thing as if you're having a normal conversation with someone, going back to what the essence of the conversation is. If you're having a conversation with someone and they said, my mate Dave said it's going to snow tomorrow, you're probably less likely to believe that than if they said the Weather Channel said it's going to snow tomorrow, you know. So where the information is coming from is important, and you can use that to build trust in the dialogue that you create. What does this slide represent? Anybody? Foundation? You're reading far too deep, but you must think that I'm going deep. It's totally irrelevant. An ironing board right now is completely irrelevant. Whereas relevancy is actually what we're searching for. It's one of Grice's maxims, isn't it? The kind of like the whole kind of relevance thing. The conversation needs to be relevant. Now, yes, the conversation needs to be relevant in terms of you don't want to create something that steers people off track. And when someone veers off track, yes, you do want to bring them back on track and keep the conversation relevant. But what I mean in this context is a little bit, it's like the next level down from that. So we've been working with this startup in the UK called Natter, and they've got this kind of like takeaway delivery service, Alexa skill, and you can use that to order delivery of chicken from a place called Other Side Fried. Now, when we did some testing, some people were trying to order more than one thing at a time. So some people were trying to say, I'll have a buffalo chicken, a buffalo cheese, and some dirty fries, or whatever it might be. Now, to create that, which we're in the process of doing, is actually pretty difficult. It's quite a hard task to do, because if someone reels off 4 examples of the things that they want and you mishear one of them, the recovery that you need to do is pretty complex, and there's a lot of room for mistakes. So although it's being worked on as a kind of short-term fix, whenever we hear someone try and order more than one thing, we'll then say, I'm sorry, but we can't handle multiple orders right now. Can you just say it one at a time? But the reason why the relevancy comes into it is that we don't say that to absolutely everybody straight away. We wait until it's relevant to say that, because most people don't try and order multiple things. Most people would just order one thing at a time anyway. And so rather than kind of badgering everybody up front, we'll wait for it to happen, and then we'll repair it when it does, for the few people where it happens. Which is kind of another sort of concept that we found with that, is this kind of concept of free movement. And people, I think it's known as like situational design, isn't it? Which is what this is. Like, people should be able to say anything at any point, and you should be able to deal with it. So we found that some people were getting right the way down the kind of purchase funnel, getting right to the point of making a payment, and then they were asking to see the menu again. So it was like, you know, when we didn't have that facility in there. So at any point in time now, wherever you are, you can ask for the menu at any point in time. It doesn't really matter. And that's kind of how a natural conversation would be. If you were having a conversation with someone and, you know, you kind of said something a little bit random or took the conversation backwards, a human would understand that that's what you're trying to do. You know, we can switch topics in conversations quite easily. And so we should create things that can handle that as well. Yeah, and that's just the example of it. Are you ready to pay? And if someone says, actually, can I see the menu again? Then we'll do that. This is Rebecca Evanhoe, and we've covered this already a little bit in terms of the confirmation, so I won't kind of dwell on that. But then the explicit confirmation, which in this example is used here, where someone says something where there is a risk of making quite a large mistake or doing something that they didn't really intend for you to do, you might want to kind of confirm that. So in a real conversation, if someone says, you know, let's say, for example, whenever you phone up someone like a TV service provider, and you try and, you know, let's say, for example, you phone, what's the network provider over here? Is it TiVo or something like that? It's, hey? Comcast. Okay, so let's say you phone Comcast and you say you're in the process of upgrading your package and you want to add all the sports channels onto it, and then you're in the process of that, and then they say that's going to be £35, and you say, actually, no, I don't want to do that. Sorry, I'll cancel. What they'll say is, are you sure you want to do that? They'll confirm that explicitly. Are you sure you want to cancel? They won't just cancel it. They'll try and kind of make sure that that's actually what you really want to do. So in this situation here, when someone says pay now, we're kind of confirming all of the details so far, and then we're saying, is that really what you want to do? Because otherwise, if someone says pay now and then you just send them straight off into Amazon Pay, Once they're gone, they're gone. It's really difficult to come, by the time they return, that you've took the money from them. So you can use that. This is, what does this represent? Hey?
Conversation repairing.
Repairing, nice, recovery. Although he doesn't recover too well from this. I kind of want to hang around and see how it finishes off. But yeah, it's recovery. So we kind of touched on a lot of this stuff, but I wanted to share what the BBC do. Has anyone experienced the CBeebies skill? Yeah, Rich, love it?
I hate it.
Really?
I'm passionate. I can't
Really?
do it. And the kids hate it as well. Yeah.
Really?
Like, it's the worst skill I think I've ever played.
Wow, that's interesting. Why is that then?
Well, it's just, it doesn't...
Don't settle the first.
Oh, it's a
Yeah.
Just from a UX point of view, I think the architecture is amazing.
Yeah.
But I think the actual voice experience for the people that it's aimed at doesn't work.
Right.
30 seconds of instructions.
Yeah,
By the time the kids are then going to actually play the game, they've
the
forgotten
bod.
what they've got to do with
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Sorry, I don't like it.
No, it's fine. Okay, don't check out the CBeebies skill then. If, but the point I was trying to make from this isn't from an architectural perspective or a conceptual perspective or a mismatch between the target market and the people who created it. What they do, there's one little thing they do which I think is really, really good, which is that if they don't hear a response to something, they will ask you if you want a surprise. It's a little tiny little thing, and so if the if the interaction isn't going down the route that they want it to, they'll just offer you a surprise. And 9 times out of 10, kids quite like surprises, and they'll do a nice little drum roll and stuff like that, and then they'll just pick something at random, which I thought is quite a nice little, quite a nice touch. Who's ever been caught in a treacherous loop? Alexa, yeah, classic, innit? Yeah, absolutely wicked. Imagine having that actual thing happen in a real conversation. What time are you going to be there? What? What time are you going to be there? 3. What time are you going to be there? 3. What time are you going to be there? 3. It just wouldn't happen, would it? It would never happen in a real conversation. In a real conversation, you would either rephrase what you're going to say, or you would say something else. Or the person will just, move on. I'll be there at 3, see you there, kind of thing, you know what I mean? And so you can kind of do the same thing. The BBC and I think a few other places, they used to use 3 kind of recovery steps. So it's like we'll push 3 times and then we'll do something about it. Whereas now I think they just use 2. So if you say something and the response you get, you don't understand what it is, you try and recover and repair. If you still don't get it, they'll do the surprise at that point. And we've worked on, should be out fairly soon, one for Unilever, which is it's for entertainment purposes, and as you're going through the interaction, depending on how you answer certain questions will determine the outcome of you having a conversation with someone, and the aim is that you make them feel better, ultimately is the concept by the end of it. Depending on how you answer, they feel better or worse at the end. So over the course of the conversation, every answer isn't necessarily that important. It's like an accumulation of the whole thing. And every response that you get after the answer is kind of similar, or not similar, but it works regardless. And so sometimes to avoid this kind of loop situation, we did the thing that you would hope an assistant would do, which is just make a choice for you and move someone on, So there's a few different ways that you can kind of go about it. This one is about taking responsibility. How many times have you heard Alexa say something like, I didn't quite catch that? Yeah, she doesn't say that again. What on earth are you trying to say? She doesn't put the blame on the person who's talking. It takes the blame and kind of, blame yourself essentially is the aim. And that's again another example of the BBC. What about this? Floyd Mayweather, one of the best in the business. So, some conversations aren't even conversations, are there? How many times have you just poked your head around the door at work or something like that and said, Jim, did you send that to Charlie? Yeah, I did, yeah. Fantastic. And then you'll leave. That's all it is, just one little interaction. I want an answer, I needed some information. Did you do that or not? Yes, you did. You might get some additional information. Oh yeah, I sent it to Charlie and she'll respond to you in half an hour or whatever it might be. But sometimes you just want to get in and get out, right? Not everything has to be a conversation. It can just be something that's said and something that's responded to. So the Royal Mail have got a good example of that. So you can ask it the last posting date before Christmas, when is the last time I can post something to Spain? And it'll just say, cut off for Spain is the 20th of December. That's pretty much it. That's all it does, you know. And you might think, well, that's a lot of time and effort to go through to just have something out there that just does one thing. But the concept is that it's serving a purpose, you know. So if it's serving a purpose, then that's fine. We spoke to Micah Richards, he's a Man City player, Micah Coppins on the podcast last year, and we had a good conversation about language, about cultures, and about how things differ between locales and stuff like that. And so there's a few things here which is related to kind of like moving an experience from one sort of locale to another, which is that when you create any voice sort of experience that is intended to go across borders, whether it's from the UK to even the US or translating into a different language, certain things might not work in other languages. It's the same. So, for example, in the UK, we have this concept of a butler, and a butler is like almost like a servant that is kind of like there to meet your every needs and all that kind of stuff. In some cases, like Batman's butler, they're actually pretty smart and almost smarter than the person who they're there serving. But in France, they don't have that concept. They don't have that cultural reference of a butler. A butler means nothing to people in France. Same kind of thing with a postman. So sometimes the kind of the persona or whatever just won't translate because that thing doesn't exist in that country. In this other example, a postman or post person in England, a postman is someone who just delivers letters, and sometimes you don't even know they've come. You just kind of go downstairs and the letters are there, and that's pretty much it. In France, people are quite close to their postmen. They get to know them, they're friendly, they know everyone in the neighbourhood, they know everyone's business. It's a really close kind of a person who you're really close with, you've got a relationship with. And so if you were to build something that had the kind of persona as a postman over here, it might be a little bit more distant, might be a little bit more, look, let's just get the job done and be done with it. Whereas if you were putting that into France, you would need to have something that's a little bit more friendly, a little bit more approachable. And some words don't exist in other languages at all. So cheesy doesn't exist in France, for example. Some words don't exist in other towns. So even when I'm from in the northeast, I would say something like well I, which just means yes. I say well I to people that I'm from the northeast, don't really know what I'm talking about, they just look at me funny. And another thing is now then. I'll say now, when I meet someone, I'll say now then, and people will be like, now then, what's he talking about? Like, now then for me means hello, but for other people it just means, what on earth is he talking about? And so, but sometimes you can get away with certain words, sometimes you can get away with jargon if you're talking to people who you know understand it. So we can have a conversation now and we can mention words like VUI and we'll probably understand what each other's talking about. But if I tell my mum that I've been working on a VUI this morning, she's going to think, what on earth are you talking about? And so you need to kind of speak the same language as the people who are interacting with you. Now, how long have we got? This next bit. Sound design is, when you're a VUX designer, I mentioned earlier on that VUX, to create anything, like any voice user experience, it requires a lot of different disciplines. Very rarely is it one person that does the whole thing. But everything that you produce, ultimately, at the end of the day, is audible, isn't it? Yes, you're going to have screens, you might have some multimodal things, you might have for Google Assistant, for example, you might be able to interact with it by text. But a voice assistant, the primary output of a voice assistant is audio. And therefore, if you're a VUX designer, you also need to be some kind of sound designer, or at least have an understanding that you're creating sound. You're not necessarily just creating words that you write down. That's Mr. Bean, by the way. Classic. So there's a few things here just to get across. Some of the reason why I think sound is so important, right? So you have to guess what this object is. And I don't know if the sound's going to work here, but we'll soon find out. That worked, didn't it? What was that? A saw. Interesting. Interesting. A table saw. Anyone else? A mixer? Vacuum. Fair enough. Yes, fair enough. But all of you realise it was some kind of electronic device. But the vacuum cleaner is the one that it is. What about this? Hold on. Hold on. There. You hear that second one? Speaker, yeah, feedback, yeah. Hold on. I can't see any sounds here, so I'm just using the. Right, hold on. Are you ready? There. Yeah. Microphone feedback. Yeah. What about this?
Vacuum.
Egg timer. It was a telephone. It was an old school telephone. Yeah.
Once you put time in America.
Hey?
Oh, the telephone of the film once you put the time in America.
Yes, maybe. I think there's someone there. So, with audio, you didn't see anything there. With audio, there might have been a little discrepancy with the vacuum cleaner situation, but if it was in the context of someone being in a living room and cleaning, that might have been a little bit easier for people to guess. So what about this? Where do you think you are when you hear something like this? Movie theatre, bang on, straight away, yeah. I'll just let that play because it's quite a good sound. Yeah, movie theatre. Next. Where? Stadium. Yes, exactly. So, audio can create different environments. It can put a user from one place to another. So, for example, if you are creating that ticket booking skill for a cinema, then what does it sound like to be in the theatre, in the kind of ticket hall? What kind of other sounds would you have? And it's kind of a case of you're not necessarily trying to accurately represent it, you're just trying to create an environment, and you're trying to kind of take the essence of that environment in the same way as you take the essence of the conversation and kind of do the same thing. So, what would you do when you hear this? Run. Exactly. What about this? Oh, that's the same thing. Run. Still run. I'd run again. Yeah. So, audio and sound, because it's hardwired into our brains, we've been hearing for just as long as we've been doing anything else. Sound and audio, the concept of processing sound is so hardwired into our brains that we can use it to make people feel a certain way, to identify certain objects, and to make people do certain stuff. How would you feel if you heard this? I would be shit scared. All right. Is it here? No. What about now? Classic. DuckTales. Yeah. Classic. So that makes me feel a little bit nostalgic. You know what I mean? So you can use audio to make people feel certain ways. And we're talking about using, dialogue to create trust with people. And over time, if people are going to use their voice assistants for all of the things that they could potentially use it for, like banking and shopping and all of that kind of stuff, then you can use audio to build trust and to help kind of build that relationship. This is an interesting one, and this is, it was taken from a TEDx talk. The aim here is to try and identify, there's 3 clips, trying to identify which clip is actually the sound of frying bacon. Right? Are you ready? Oh, it's very quiet. Did anyone hear that? You think it was 3? You saw it as well? You think it was 3? Okay. The people who heard it think it was 3. One person thinks it was 1. You think it was 2? 2? Yeah? Sure? Okay. I wish I had some money or some treats to give the winner. It was actually all of them. They were all the sound of frying bacon. Still pretty good, isn't it?
I'm hungry now.
I know, so am I. Luckily, it's lunchtime as soon as I'm done. But the point is that you don't, when you create kind kind of audible experiences, you don't have to use the actual sounds. So a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm not a sound designer, how can I do anything other than just write dialogue and translate it through text-to-speech? But there are all kinds of different places that you can get sounds from. There's a place called Pond 5, which isn't fantastic, but at least it will get you some audio that you can actually use to start experimenting a little bit. Amazon have got a sound library, an SSML kind of based sound library, which is okay, but it's not fantastic. But it's just a case of you don't have to use the actual sounds of something to get across the effect. So we've spoke a little bit about dialogue, we've spoke a little bit about sound, and both of those put together, a person speaking is essentially dialogue and sound. And so, has anyone read the book, The Wired for Speech, Clifford Nass and Scott Brave? Fantastic. If you haven't, do check it out. The whole concept is how we are hardwired to understand and process speech in certain ways. And through listening to a tiny, tiny bit of speech, you can actually work out, or at least assume, it doesn't have to be accurately, but at least in your mind you'll be able to assume the gender of someone, the age of someone, roundabout where they're from, what their kind of education level is, what mood they're in, and over time you'll be able to figure out whether or not you're likely to trust them or not. So think about that. We don't have to go through the whole kind of guessing game process, but think about all of those different things when you hear this next clip.
First of all, to give some basic figures, the Amazon basin is huge. The Amazon basin is 7 million square kilometers.
Gender? Age? Mid-40s? Where's he from? UK. Education level? Say again? Postgraduate? What mood was he in? Neutral? Fair enough. I would say he was kind of fairly determined, I would say. Would you trust him? Would you lend him a tenner? No? Does anyone know who it was? Me? No. I'm not that good at impressions. It was Graham Hancock. He's actually, 69. I thought he was a bit younger than that. What about this one? I think you probably know who that. Down here, is it? Did you hear that or not? Yeah. Yeah. Do you know, I only found out who she was when I was putting this together, and the first time I showed it to somebody, like last week, straight away it was like, that's Greta Thunberg. I know that is. I need to pick a different example. But the same kind of thing. You can tell that it's a lot more emotive, you can tell that the person's a lot younger, you can obviously tell that she's female, you can tell that she's kind of angry. And so, I'll go back to that in a sec. And so you can convey a hell of a lot just with a voice, all right? And also, it's not just as much as about what you say, it's also about how you say it. So think about the way that this sounds.
Breath you take, every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take on every word you say, every game you play, every night you stay, I'll be watching you.
It's enough to give me nightmares, that, isn't it? So, doesn't have quite the same emotion as when Sting sings it. So the point of all of this is don't leave all of that stuff to chance. Don't leave the way that something is said, how it's said, the emotion that's in the voice, the kind of personality the person has. Don't leave all of that to chance, because as you've just kind of been through the process of trying to identify and preempt what's the sound of bacon, who is this person, how old are they, or whatever, what have you. It's all stuff that you're going to think of anyway whenever you hear anything, because we're hardwired for speech and we're hardwired for sound. And if you don't think about the sound and how you are designing the sound, then you're leaving it to chance. How long have we got? We've got 10 minutes left. I can go through and talk a little bit about some of the audio assets, like sonic logos, earcons, stuff like that. Or we can do a bit of a Q&A and have a bit of a discussion. What would you rather do?
Discussion.
Discussion? That sounds good. Fine. Any questions so far?
Do a logo.
Hey?
Do a logo.
Okay.
Do at least one.
Okay. Yeah?
I have a question, but yeah.
Okay, we'll do one logo and then we'll come up with a question. So some of the things that you can use to get across certain values of your brand is this concept of a sonic logo. Has anyone heard of a sonic logo before? Yeah? It's the kind of thing that you traditionally will hear kind of at the end of adverts on TV. You hear that little sort of sonic logo. But when you think about the fact that we're creating audible experiences across a whole load of different platforms, how does someone know whether it's American Airlines or British Airways or whoever else is? The first thing is, does it matter? Do I care as long as I get the plane to where I'm going? But actually it does, because I would trust someone like, or a company like American Airlines and British Airways more than I would an airline that I've never heard before. If I'm going to put my life in the hands of this company while I'm traveling, then I need to trust who they are. So a marker of trust and a symbol that this is the company that you're interacting with, you can use a sonic logo. It's an audible equivalent of the actual physical logo that you'll see. So I've got a couple of sonic logos. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. I'll try and move the mic a little bit closer and see. I can't turn it up from on here, that's the only thing. So whose logo is this? Netflix, nice. Not even a hesitation down there. What about this? NBC, nice. McDonald's, yeah. That's going to test you, that one. Anyone? CBS? No, it's LG. LG. And I think we might have one more. That was always in there for a joke, everyone knows that one. But it just shows just how effective this is. Everyone laughed when that last logo came on, the Intel one, because everyone is so familiar with it, they've badgered it into people's heads, and so you know who it is. And then the other thing, I'll mention earcons briefly and then we'll go to some questions. Earcons are the things that can represent either progress or whatever else that you need to convey within a skill. So examples of earcons are, by the way, when I play these, try and think about what you would expect this to mean, right? Hello? There you go. Starting something. Nice, like it. What about this? Notification? Yeah. Aha. Someone coming online, that's good. But it's not the one. Anyone else?
Dance party.
Dance party, that did sound pretty dancey, yeah. This is a good test to see how well this earcon is actually created. Any other guesses? Waiting, yeah, could be. So we've had three guesses, three completely different guesses. So MasterCard, having spent $10 million on this, didn't quite do the job they needed it to. But it's the sound of a successful payment being taken. Interesting. So Eric C., who he's got a company called Audio UX, and they do stuff like this. They create things like earcons and sonic logos and all that kind of stuff. And they worked on this report with Veritonic, and they showed or found that if you design earcons purposefully and you have a group of earcons that are related, it doesn't have to be the same sound, but the sound needs to come from the same family, and you use them in an interactive audio experience versus not really thinking about the earcons and just throwing something in there. It increases things like the preference for interaction. So 75% of people would prefer to interact with an experience that's got premium earcons, if you like. It helps to convey personality. More people think that the product sounds more premium. More people would rather own the product that represents. They think it's more trustworthy, etc., etc., etc. And so investing in things like sonic logos can help you across all channels, not just voice, but across all channels, show that you are trustworthy and tap into that kind of trust that people might already have with that brand. And also designing earcons can help create and make the experience more engaging and a little bit more trustworthy. That's Joel Beckerman. But you had a question?
Yeah. So I run a consortium, Project Silver, where we try to make the lives of elderly or older adults better using voice technology, because they don't need to do swiping and all that stuff that we're used to, and they're back in the game. So what are your learnings, if you have any, regarding designing for older adults?
Cool. So a few of the things from Design from Older Adults, we had, do you know Heidi Culbertson? Yes. Fantastic. Yes, she's not here this week. But Heidi has a company, for those that don't know, called Ask Marvy. And they provide, it started out by providing kind of like, almost like being able to check in on one of your relatives. And so every morning, you know, your grandma or whatever can just tell Alexa that I'm fine, and then that'll send a text message to like the son or the daughter or whatever. And some of the things that she found, I've never worked on a project specifically targeting elderly, but some of the things that she found was that elderly or older adults would prefer the voice to be slower. So not speaking fast, speaking pretty slow, and also leaving a longer pause for responses. Longer time for them to gather their thoughts and understand what they might want to say next, essentially. Those were the two kind of main things that came out of that. But it's interesting, the accessibility, and this isn't necessarily down to design, although it's product design on the part of the platforms, if you like. Because one of the things we found when we spoke to Will Merrill from Smart Design Worldwide, and they'd worked on a project, it was called Project Susan, I think it was called, for Channel 4. They'd created an echo, two echoes on top of each other, and dressed it in an owl, right? And essentially Susan, she had MS, so she couldn't do much for herself. Even shutting the blinds and stuff like that, she had to get help with. So they created a skill that was hooked up to the blinds and all that kind of stuff for her. And what they found the biggest thing for adoption and usage for she was an older adult, but so it's not exclusive to older adults, but also people with access needs, was actually that you need an app to even set the thing up in the first place. Pairing it to the app and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So it's kind of onboarding is pretty intense. Ooh. I felt like we were going to take off there. I think that might symbolise close to the end. But we do have a couple more minutes. Any other questions? Yeah?
So Keith, you talked about like listening and like, especially about Walmart skill, listening to like the request coming for weather. Now, if your skill or application, is the core functionality is not to respond to weather, or so what's the best way to respond to requests which are coming to your skill, like which are not relevant to your skill?
There's some that will be happening that you probably won't even know about. I think the weather thing actually come from them doing user research and just observing people interact with the skill. There may be things that you think is related to your product, but that you can't provide yet. So, for example, in the banking kind of example, let's say you've got a banking skill, and all it does, the primary function of it is to show people the balance. It wouldn't be difficult to come up with a roadmap for a banking app that has a whole lot of features around transferring money, around putting money into savings accounts, how much did I spend last month on food, all of these kind of things. You could come up with a whole load of these things that would take you forever to build, and you might not build all of them anyway, but it's an understanding of the kind of things that would be useful for people to ask it. And then you could potentially have a response for each of those, because it wouldn't take you long to have a quick holding response. But the holding response should just be something along the lines of, we can't do whatever, repeat it back to them so that they know that you've understood exactly what they're asking for. So we can't transfer money at the moment, but we're working on it, or it's coming, or whatever it might be. I think the most important part there is showing that you've heard the thing that they've said, and then, regardless of what the next step is, if it's coming soon, it's coming soon. If it's not, it's not. I think the main thing is to show them that you've at least heard them, essentially. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions?
You talked a little bit about designing a soundscape using the sound of the stadium for purchasing tickets. In other media, like the iPad or the phones, the trend has been drifting away from skeuomorphic interfaces where the calendar looks like a physical calendar with binding and stuff like that. how much of that design paradigm do you see being in effect for sound design?
That's essentially where we're at now. It's almost it is skeuomorphism essentially for voice. And in fact, the whole premise of what we were talking about earlier on with conversation design. The conversation design right now, the interaction that you have with a voice assistant is almost a skeuomorph of a conversation itself. It's the essence of it. But what does everyone know what skeuomorphism is? Yeah. So for those that don't, it's essentially when you take a real life thing and you almost recreate it digitally to represent. So, for example, when you used to open the Apple Notes pad on your phone, it was lined paper. Yeah, so it was just to show that this is a notepad. It's the same as the physical notepad, but it's a digital version of it. And what it does is it helps people understand what this thing should be used for. So the sound recording app, you know, the voice notes app on iOS, that used to be a microphone. You'd press it, a red light comes on, and it would say something like on air or something like that. It's mimicking what you would see in a studio, right? And all it does is it will it's used to try and educate people about what the digital version of the analog is. And so things like that, using stadium sounds if you've got a sports score scale, or using thunder noises if it's going to be thundery tomorrow in a weather scale, or a little cha-ching when you kind of transfer money on your banking app. All those kind of things they could be considered skeuomorphic. But skeuomorphism in an early, or not so much early, but in a world where you're trying to educate people about a new paradigm, using an old paradigm is sometimes useful to reference. We might move away from it eventually, but at the moment I think it's a good idea.
Have you given much thought to sort of the paradigm shift that's taking place in the Amazon world with the move kind of away from the individual designer designing the conversation with, you know, your intents and your interaction models, and more of a conversation design pattern where you create a knowledge base for your skill, what it's supposed to do for the user, and then the conversation design is actually kind of automatically generated under the covers because the technology knows how to handle the right, how to get the right responses from the user to complete whatever the goal is that your service provides.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of takes a lot of things that you were talking about and maybe changes how you would look at those things.
Maybe, yeah. I think I was on a panel at Mobile UX London, and we had a conversation about how over time maybe conversation design is not even needed. You know, if the technology gets to a point where it can understand absolutely everything, then is there a need for a designer? I don't know whether it will get to the point where it's whether it's as if it's flexible enough to cater for absolutely anything that someone would say, and all you do is you have a bank of intents and everything's handled after that. Potentially, are we over time?
I know you must have a zillion more questions for this good man. I'm going to recommend that you take them with this good man out in the hall so we can get the next session in here.
Okay.
Round of applause for all
Fair
of you.
VUX World. VUX World.
VUX World.
VUX World. Branding.